We like to believe we're good judges of people, that we can spot talent, read between the lines, and trust our instincts. But here's the truth. When it comes to choosing the right people, whether in life, love, or business, most of us are flying blind. Just consider this. A Harvard study found that we form first impressions in just 7 seconds. And then we actually spend the rest of the conversation unconsciously confirming what we already think we know, not learning, just reinforcing our biases. And this has real-world consequences. Take hiring, for example. One of the most respected studies on the topic by Schmidt and Hunter found that unstructured interviews, which, by the way, are the most common type of interview leaders still use today, are only slightly better at predicting job success than flipping a coin. That's a 50-50 chance of making the right hiring decision. Pretty shocking, wouldn't you agree? And now we're actually multiplying those instincts through AI. Just look at the recent case involving Workday. Their AI-driven hiring tool is under legal scrutiny for rejecting hundreds, if not thousands of applicants over the age of 40, and doing so without a single human reviewing those applications. The issue here wasn't actually the technology, it was the logic behind it. A flawed system trained on flawed decisions which replicated bias at scale. The fact is, we keep chasing solutions without getting clear on the outcomes we're actually aiming for. And that's at the heart of this video. The problem isn't just the choices we make, it's the questions we ask before we make those choices. You see, better questions lead to better decisions, and better decisions lead to better outcomes in business, in leadership, and in life. And this isn't just about hiring. We do the same thing in relationships. We assume shared interests mean shared values. We ask about preferences, not principles. And then we're actually surprised when things fall apart under pressure. We also do it in leadership. We promote people based on past performance, not future fit. We trust familiarity over clarity and confidence over competence. And now we're actually feeding these same shortcuts into AI. We think tech will solve our decision problems, but here's the sad truth. AI is only as good as the human understanding of the problem it's trying to solve. If we haven't defined the right outcomes, if we haven't defined the problems, if we haven't asked the right questions, AI will just replicate what it knows and lace it with all the bias and bad habits it has picked up online. It'll just do it faster and at scale. So this isn't just a process issue, it's a thinking issue, a clarity issue. Hiring isn't just about choosing someone, it's about placing a bet on who can deliver the outcomes that we need. And for most leaders, hiring is one of those skills that they were never taught how to do. You can go through an entire MBA program without learning how to interview. You can run a company, manage a budget, build a strategy, and still be expected to figure out interviewing and hiring on your own. There's no training, no feedback, no process for learning how to interview and hire. Okay, sure, there might be some HR-led interview and bias recognition training in larger corporations, but in general, you sit in on a few interviews to learn the ropes, and then you're on your own, suddenly hiring someone for a critical role. And if it goes wrong, well, the cost of a replacement hire ranges from 2 to 20 times the annual salary of the person you are replacing. It's as if we believe in the hiring fairy, the tooth fairy's second cousin, that overnight turns us into an expert at hiring and interviewing. There is this assumption that if you're smart, your instincts will be enough to make the right decision. But after 12,000 interviews and over 1,000 hires, I can tell you this. Instincts without structure lead to inconsistent results. Because what do we do as humans? Well, our brains are quite lazy, so we take shortcuts. We fall back on the questions we know, the questions we're comfortable with. Tell me about yourself. What's your biggest weakness? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Then we listen for vague signals. Are they a team player? Do they take ownership? Are they a good fit? But none of those words mean the same thing to everyone. What feels like initiative to one person might come across as arrogance to another. What works in Berlin might not fit in Tokyo. What lands at Deutsche Bank won't work in OpenAI. What works in sales will not necessarily fit in IT. We use shorthand and we assume everyone interprets it in the same way. Well, they don't. So if we want better outcomes, we have to start by asking better questions. But how do we do that? Well, let me walk you through a simple process for this. First, we need to start by defining outcomes, not the role, but the outcomes. And before we ask a single question, we need to get clear on this one thing. What is the person here to achieve? What does actually success look like in 6, 12, 18 months down the line? And what are the behaviors that actually drive that kind of success in our environment, in the context of our organization? This is the hiring blueprint. It's the foundation of everything. The focus is not on skills, tasks, or responsibilities like we see in most job descriptions, but on outcomes and competencies. Because if you don't define success clearly, you're not hiring, you're hoping. Once we've defined what success looks like, we can ask questions that reveal how someone thinks, not just what they've done. A great question isn't just a prompt, it's a tool, a way of gathering evidence, gathering facts, like a detective using a spyglass to find clues. Great interviewers use questions to uncover how someone thinks, decides, adapts, learns. You're not looking for perfection here. You're looking for facts, evidence, patterns, and signals. So when you design a question, ask yourself this: what outcome am I trying to assess for? What behaviors, what competencies drive that outcome here? What questions would reveal whether that behavior shows up under real-world conditions? Those are the meaningful questions. So, for example, instead of asking, "What's your biggest weakness?" you can ask, "Can you tell me about a piece of feedback that you received that changed how you work? What was hard about receiving that feedback? And what did you change as a result? How have you applied that since?" Or instead of, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Ask, "If you were in my position, what would you focus your energy on and why?" Or, "If you were hired into this role, how would you measure success? How would that change over the course of a year, 3 years, 5 years?" These questions are not about catching someone off guard. They're about clarity. Because when you ask better questions, you don't just get better answers. You get better insights, better facts, better evidence. And that's what leads to better decisions. And talking of decisions, we need to turn those insights into action. This is where structure actually gives you power. When you've defined outcomes and designed questions around them, you can actually compare candidates based on the things that matter, not likability, not energy, not gut feel. That's why structure matters. Interview frameworks like STAR, STAR+O, or Parla are not about being robotic or mechanical. They're about being intentional. You see, a framework like STAR+O will help you surface the real outcomes, not just the steps taken, but whether they led to results that mattered and how they tied back to the real-world outcomes that were meant to be delivered. A framework like Parla goes even deeper. It looks at problem, action, results, learning, and application. It reveals how someone grows through real-world complexity, how they apply what they learn. These aren't just theoretical tools. They actually change the way you listen. They give you structure to compare candidates based on how they actually behave under pressure. Not how polished their stories are, but how they perform in the real world. And we want to be making decisions based on that type of evidence, that type of facts, evidence that ties directly back to the outcomes that you care about and the behaviors that drive them forward. So it is important that you know the tools that will help you reveal this. This is why we define, design, and only then do we decide. Only then do we hire. It's not a system, it's a mindset shift. One that shifts your focus from what someone says to how they operate. From who looks right to who thinks right for the work ahead. And that changes everything. And the best part about this, it doesn't require an overhaul of anything. I've seen teams transform their entire hiring outcome just by writing a clear job mission statement. I've also seen managers go from dreading interviews to feeling confident because their questions finally revealed tangible facts, tangible evidence instead of fluff. One founder I worked with actually kept hiring people who looked great on paper, had great credentials, but couldn't thrive in the startup chaos of his organization. Once we got clear on what success meant, fast thinking, ownership, high adaptability, low ego, and defined what those terms actually meant for him and his team, everything shifted and the hires changed and the results followed. This isn't about asking more questions. In fact, most interviews you only get to ask 4 or 5 really meaningful questions. So every question has to count and every follow-up has to be intentional. Questions matter because better questions are what turns conversations into clarity and clarity into outcomes. And that shift doesn't take years. It can happen in a single conversation. So here's my invitation to you. Before your next big conversation, whether you're hiring, promoting, or committing to something, take a pause. Ask yourself this: what is the outcome I want? What will it take to get there? And what behaviors will actually make it happen? Then build your questions from there, because good decisions don't start with gut feeling. They start with clarity, and that clarity starts with the right questions. That's how we get better outcomes in business, in leadership, and in life.